morning. This morning I want us to look at aspects of worship, and by that it's not a new Andrew Lloyd Webber production, and it's not about standing in different parts of the room watching the worship band. Worship, he paid the penalty for living a lifestyle of luxury, and when he realises his mistake, he begs for someone to go and warn his brothers. He wanted someone to tell his 5 brothers to change their lifestyle before it was too late. He wanted someone to tell them to adopt a lifestyle helping the poor and needy. In fact, in the Message, I'm going to read from Matthew 25, in the Message from verse 31, which also Jesus backs up the same story when he says, "When he finally arrives, blazing in beauty, and all his angels with him, the Son of Man will take his place on his glorious throne. Then all the nations will be arranged before him, and he will sort the people out, much as the shepherd sorts out sheep and goats, putting sheep to his right and goats to his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what's coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation. And here's why. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was homeless and you gave me a room. I was shivering and you gave me clothes. I was sick and you stopped to visit. I was in prison and you came to me.' And those sheep are going to say, 'Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you?' Then the king will say, 'I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it for me.' Then he would turn to the goats, the ones on his left, and say, 'Get out, worthless goats. You're good for nothing but the fires of hell.' And why? Because I was hungry and you gave me no meal. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was homeless and you gave me no bed. I was shivering and you gave me no clothes. Sick and in prison and you never visited.' Then those goats are going to say, 'Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or homeless or shivering or sick or in prison and didn't help you?' He will answer them, 'I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you failed to do one of these things to someone who has been overlooked or ignored, that was me. You failed to do it to me.' Then those goats will be herded to their eternal doom, but the sheep to their eternal reward." So a lifestyle of worship should involve helping the poor and needy, the homeless, the sick, and those in prison. And we need to be on our guard with our lifestyle of worship. The word of warning is that we can take on the characteristics of the things we worship. If we worship possessions, we could become materialistic. If we worship money, we could become greedy. And if we worship power, then we may become corrupt. But the good news is that we truly worship Jesus and make that worship a lifestyle. We should take on the characteristics of Jesus. We should become a Christ-like person. You see, I don't think you can separate a lifestyle of worship from love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. You know, in this statement, Jesus is telling us to love God with every part of our being. Who we are, the spirit, the core of our being, the soul, our emotions, our strength of mind, our bodies and flesh. And having established that, to love everybody we ever meet. This verse is at the very core of a lifestyle of worship. But what about the people we meet and socialise and work with? Many years ago, before I was saved, I remember picking the Bible up and really not understanding any of it, and just saying, "What do you know?" I was praying, really. I just said to God, "If this is true, show me," and tucked it back in the bookcase. And within 2 weeks, 4 to 5 people came and suddenly appeared working in the company that I worked for then. And there was something about these people that I enjoyed being around them. It was indefinable. I liked being in their company. There was something attractive about them. And I didn't know to start with that they were Christians. But I did know I liked to be around them. And I just remember it wasn't long, of course, before I gave my life to the Lord. So the question is, within our lifestyle, do our friends, our work colleagues, our relations, are they attracted to us? Do they see something different in us? And what about ourselves, the people we fellowship and worship with each other? You know, Jesus, in Luke 9, verse 1 to 3, says, when Jesus put the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases, and he sent them out to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. So, do we do that? Do we preach the good news? Do we heal the sick? Do we cast out demons? Rob was saying last week, we need to know God. We need to know God through his word. And we read the Bible regularly. This preach, heal, deliver, these things are an integral part of the lifestyle of worship and were routine, day-to-day activities for the followers of Jesus some 2,000 years ago. So going up to the lifestyle of worship, that doesn't mean that the enemy leaves alone. We need to go and protect that lifestyle. Jesus gave us many statements regarding how to live our lives, or more accurately, things to avoid doing within our lives. And really, this is where the rubber hits the road, particularly in this day and age that we live in. For example, this is from Matthew, that tells you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. But I tell you, do not swear at all. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. These are challenging statements and very relevant to us today, and there are really more examples. Also, Matthew, do not judge, and you will be judged. So if you do to others what you haven't done to you. People ask not how many times you have to do it 7 times. Jesus said that 7 times, but 70 times 7. Challenging scriptures to us and very relevant to us today. So, can we develop a lifestyle worship? And what would that involve? As I said last week, we'll never reach the standard Jesus sets in our lifetimes. But that doesn't mean to say we should throw it.
An expression and relationship. You know, the day you asked Jesus into your life as Lord and Saviour and said the words, Lord, I'm a sinner, forgive me of my sin, this was your heart's response, expressing your recognition of who God is, and it was the start of your relationship with God. And more importantly, it was your first act of Christian worship. If you cast your mind back to our definition of worship and meaning finding worth in someone. So worshipping God is a natural response to a personal revelation of who God is and what he has done and continues to do in our lives. Every Sunday we give expression to this in our thanksgiving, praise and worship, in song and dance and prayer. Without this personal revelation of who God is, we would all be worshipping robots, following tradition rather than following our hearts. In fact, a few weeks ago, it was our last meeting at the museum cafe, there we all... Hello! God of the earth, when all of a sudden the museum alarm goes off. Events took place with our visitors. But how I was driving home thinking what a bizarre meeting and how strange that an alarm should cut right across the worship. And then I started to think, well, you know, what is an alarm? Well, an alarm is telling you something is wrong. It could be telling you something is happening that shouldn't be happening, but more commonly it's a wake-up call. And I believe God is giving us a wake-up call in the area of worship, and more specifically, the value of worship. So having established why and who we should worship, I want us to look at the value of worship, and maybe the value of worship from a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to look at Luke 4 verses 1 to 8, which says the following. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the desert, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man does not live on bread alone." The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, "I will give you all their authority and splendor, for it has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. So if you worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Now this was not a cozy little conversation between Satan and Jesus. This was a challenge over the single most valuable spiritual act that a person can give. And that act is the act of worship. Think about it. Satan's most valued possession, the nations and kingdoms of the earth, he was prepared to trade for the act of worship, and more specifically, Jesus' worship. Satan effectively worshipped worship. The value of Jesus' worship to him far outweighed the value of the nations and kingdoms of the earth. The created wanted the Creator to offer up worship to him. And notice that Satan invited Jesus to worship him and not to give praise. Satan wanted to receive respect and approval, ultimately to be perceived as worthy of worship. So, how does this biblical event affect us today? What are the implications to us as worshippers of God? Well, in Romans 8 verse 17 says the following, "And if we are his children, then we are his heirs also, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ." Now the word heir means an inheritance or entitlement, and we are being told here in the Bible that we are jointly entitled to share an inheritance with Christ. And notice this verse tells us we are fellow heirs, not sole heirs, or some Bibles will say co-heirs or joint heirs. We are to inherit the same eternal glory as Christ. Now, how do you put a valuation on a joint inheritance with the Creator of all things? You cannot. This joint inheritance is beyond our comprehension, but we know it's the truth. And although we may not fully understand it, we can respond to this truth. How? By worship. Worship the person who is sharing their inheritance with us, Jesus, the Son of God. In Acts 17 verse 28, Paul tells us, "For in him we live and move and have our being." Paul is telling us our very identification with Christ is in him. The presence of Jesus is the very source of our existence. So, therefore it follows, if we live and move and have our being in Jesus, and we are joint heirs with Jesus, everything we do and say takes on an immeasurable value. For worship. Our worship is not just more valuable, our worship